All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Pillars Conference. We're going to be starting our last session for the day. But before we begin, a reminder, we will be using the same Zoom link all day, even though it's the end of the day. So if you do need to sign out for any reason during this session, you can log right back in with the same link from your email. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, drop us a line in the chat or by email at events@esln.org. If you have questions for the presenter, please submit them to the Q&A located at the bottom of your screen. All attendees are expected to follow the Pillars Code of Conduct, which will be added to the chat shortly. To summarize, please treat all staff, event attendees, and speakers with respect. Those who are not adhering to the Code of Conduct will be removed from the webinar. Now, please enjoy our last session titled AI and the Future of Work.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are all still fresh and ready for this last session. My name is Professor Ifeoma Ajunwa. I am a professor of law at Emory Law School. A little bit about my background. I am trained as a sociologist. I got my PhD from Columbia University, and I'm also trained as a lawyer, and I teach at a law school. So that just sort of tells you essentially my bent when looking at AI. So I look at essentially how AI is impacting society, specifically the workplace. And I also look at what sort of laws and regulation we need in place as guardrails for AI as it continues developing. So my presentation today is titled AI and the Future of Work. And it's just to give you an idea of what to expect for the future of work as AI continues to be introduced in the workplace, and perhaps what you as a worker should know or should strive to know to remain competitive in the market. So moving on to my next slide. The first thing is, what is AI really doing? How is it really impacting industry? So this is something that major economists have already started to look at. Darren Acemoglu, for example, has found that AI has already started to contribute about 70% to US wage inequality, meaning that it's increasing the gulf in terms of the salary of the people who know AI versus people who don't know AI. And, while AI has really started taking off in the last, let's say, decade or so, it doesn't mean it hasn't actually been around for a while. It's just been not as prevalent as once we started having generative AI. And another economist, Eric Brynjolfsson, who's at Stanford, also is noting that AI is transforming jobs themselves. So it's not just about AI creating a gulf between workers, but it's also changing the nature of jobs and what types of work are going to be in demand. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So essentially, how is AI having a direct impact on industries? Well, when you look at medicine, AI technologies are frequently being used for the diagnostic part of medicine. So that means that when you are going to the doctor's office, is not just your doctor, the human who's looking at your labs or who's looking at your test results. A lot of times there is also an AI program providing additional information for the doctor. So all your labs, all your diagnostic information may, with your permission, be run through AI also to help the doctor come up with the right diagnostic. And it actually has been shown that medical AI does improve diagnostic accuracy, sometimes by up to 20%. Also, we see it in the finance and trading. We see obviously AI in content creation. As some of you might know, there's a dark side, right, to AI and content creation. Recently, Marco Rubio was a target of AI-generated fakes, where his image and voice was used to create a video and disseminated of him saying things he didn't actually say. So that is the dark side of that. But there's also actually a business side of that, which is that, for example, AI could be used to create training videos, for example, or other types of informational videos used in the workplace or used for business. And AI, of course, is integrating into caregiving. So, for example, when elderly patients are in a care home, some of them may have wearables, whether it's AI-enabled rings or AI-enabled bracelets or AI-enabled pendants that actually would monitor their vitals and be sending those stats to their caregivers. So it's kind of like lending an extra eye, so to speak. So helping caregivers, both informal or informal, with taking care of elderly, for example, or people who frankly just need extra care needs. And perhaps most important to you that's attending this conference, AI is increasingly being integrated into teaching. This is also of interest to me because I am an educator first and foremost. I'm a law professor, so I am teaching law students. And so I have been keeping my eye on how AI has been integrated into curricula at some law schools already. At my law school, I'm one of the teachers who have integrated AI to some extent in my teaching. Now, obviously, there are positives to this. You're able to really introduce your students to the types of AI technologies that they might encounter in the workplace. But you also have to be careful because you don't want to create a situation where the student is relying too heavily on the AI and they're not learning the sort of learning skills that they will still really need even if they have AI to help them, right? So, and what I mean by that is like the sort of like critical thinking, analytical thinking that's really key to learning. And I think that there's that tension there, right? As AI is being introduced into teaching, you have to, of course, think, oh, yes, I want to expose my students to this. I want to introduce my students to this. I want my students to be adept with using AI in any form. But on the other hand, you have to be careful how you're introducing it to the students and what you're sort of challenging the students to do, because the brain is also another muscle. So if students are able to delegate all their thinking to AI, they're going to then lose those critical thinking skills, those critical and analytical skills that they still will need in the workplace. And of course, we all know with ChatGPT that a lot of clerical work is now being automated, but really not as much as you would think, right? Because we obviously know that ChatGPT can write emails. We know that ChatGPT can sort through information, but there's still so much clerical work that ChatGPT cannot really do well. For example, let's say you want to make an itinerary, like you're traveling. ChatGPT is not always good at actually common sense things like figuring out, oh, the time between two, different places and building in wiggle room and all that sort of thing that, a human can think through and say, okay, even though this is 5 miles apart, I'm not just going to allocate exactly time for 5 miles. I might want to give some wiggle room and things like that to get there. And also looking at the different types of transportation to get there. So I guess my point is, I think the sort of discourse about all of clerical work being taken over by AI is actually quite overblown at this time. There's still, I think, a gap there that humans are still very much needed. And then, companies, however, are looking at generative AI in a lot of ways as a cost saving, labor saving, business profit making device, right? They're looking at this as a way to cut money, cut the money they're spending, cut the labor they need, and essentially make more profit. And so a recent survey by Business Insider found that essentially most businesses who were surveyed were seeing that there's a net total advantage to using generative AI. They are finding that there's at least 52% of those companies are finding that there is a reduction in errors when they're using Gen AI. Some are even claiming 45% are saying that they're seeing better quality work products. Obviously, the increase in speed is sort of like mixed because if you've ever used ChatGPT, you might notice that frankly, you have to go back and redo a lot of the things that you quickly did. Therefore, kind of negating some of the speed, perhaps. But companies are reporting greater levels of productivity. They're reporting that they are seeing decreased labor costs. They are seeing obviously issues with business risk, right? Because when you're using Gen AI, you are taking a risk that some of the information that the Gen AI is giving you is incorrect, it's inaccurate. So that there is a business risk with that, because of course, if you're presenting something to a client that the client then finds to be inaccurate, that can take a hit on your business reputation. And one of the biggest disadvantages, frankly, is the lack of personal touch, right? So a lot of businesses are saying that one of the business risks is that you're losing this personal touch. So my point, I guess, with all of this is to tell you that yes, Gen AI in a lot of ways is making work easier. A lot of companies are liking that it's reducing manual errors. They're liking the greater levels of productivity, but they're not also blind to the fact that there are these risks and drawbacks, including the lack of personal touch. And I think that's where humans will continue to flourish. Humans are able to produce in a way that is, sort of emblematic of that personal touch are the humans that will rise to the top. And we'll talk more about this also in terms of soft skills. So you might think to yourself, well, why are we suddenly caring about Gen AI? Like, should we really care? Is this like a fad that's just gonna come and go? Is this something that's just like wholly new? And my response to you is actually, this is not really wholly new at all. As early as 1961, Dr. Martin Luther King, who many may not know was actually very much involved in labor organizing and in fighting for economic justice as well as racial justice, he actually sounded a warning as he saw that factories were becoming automated, especially car manufacturing. So you were now having a lot of actual robots, certain types of AI being introduced as part of the car manufacturing factories, which used to be very big in the US. Like a lot of car companies were actually instrumental in creating and maintaining a large American middle class post World War II. But Martin Luther King saw in 1961, about almost 20 years after World War II, he did see that there had now started to be this process of automation, where a lot of jobs that humans used to do we're now going to automated processes, automated engines in the factories and warehouses and manufacturing houses. And he sounded a warning that, when we're thinking about automation, we have to also remember the humans, that this will impact. And we have to think about what are human values that we want to continue to hold as paramount, even as we're thinking about this profit motive that the automation will bring. So that is something that was a big or key part of my book, The Quantified Worker. So my book looked at law and technology specifically in the modern workplace. And what I mean by the quantified worker is I was actually arguing that with the rise of AI technologies, in the last few decades, what we have seen is not just scientific management, right, which is Frederick Winslow Taylor's theory that you want to look at work in a scientific way and break down the job tasks such that anyone can do that job. But instead, what you are seeing now is quantification of American workers, where the employer is now looking at the American worker as numbers. They're now quantifying the worker through personality job tests, through automated video interviews and all these AI processes where they're even using worker surveillance, and they kind of like just turning workers into numbers and not really looking at the whole person. And this is especially evident in automated hiring, where you have discrimination, where people are being graded and quickly sort of dismissed. And it's also evident in automated video interviews, where people are graded if they have an accent, or personality job tests, where a lot of people are actually being dinged on the personality job test because they might have a mental health issue, which may not necessarily impact their job, but it just means that they're outside of the normal range that those personality job tests are set. So all this is now creating then essentially a quantified way to discriminate against workers in ways that sometimes are actually illegal. So my book was all about thinking about ways that we want to create stronger laws to protect workers in this new AI, future where workers are being quantified more and more. So, and a big point of the book, and I think of what I'm trying to say here, is that, you know, while AI technologies are helpful and useful, we also have to understand that AI technologies are running on algorithms. And unfortunately, algorithms can be biased. I mean, not in themselves, but they can be biased in terms of who created the algorithms, right? Because algorithms can actually reproduce existing patterns of discrimination, and they basically inherit the prejudice of whoever is creating that algorithm, and they can actually reflect the biases that already exist in society. And I'll give you an example of this. So a news example of this is that Amazon in 2018 had a whistleblower actually leak to the press that Amazon had created an AI recruiting tool. And unfortunately, that tool that Amazon created was actually found to be biased against women. So imagine this. Amazon is thinking, okay, we want to be objective in how we're hiring people. So we're going to create an AI tool to handle our hiring for us. This is 2018. But then when they actually ran their tool, they found that the tool was just marking down any women that had sent an interview, that has sent in a resume. Their resume was ranked lower than all the men. And you might say, well, why would this happen? Of course, Amazon is not trying to deliberately, discriminate against women. I mean, isn't the reason for creating an AI hiring tool to be objective? Well, the reason why this could happen is if Amazon trained its AI recruiting tool on its top performers. So let's say Amazon was like, well, we know the types of people who perform well in our company. So we're going to take their resumes and we're going to feed their resumes to the AI recruiting tool so that that tool can tell us from any resumes that we get who to hire. Well, what's the problem with that? If the population at Amazon was already skewed towards men, that means the top performers are mostly going to be men. So when you then take the resumes of the top performers and feed that into the machine, you're going to get an algorithm that's going to be biased against women because they don't look the same as the top performers, right? The women are going to have things that mention women's schools and etc. So that's a clear example. And then you also have other deliberate discrimination, right? So for example, Facebook was alleged to be letting job advertisers target only men. So these were like jobs like CEO jobs, and they would only advertise essentially to men using their algorithm, right? And then there's an ongoing lawsuit against Workday, essentially claiming that Workday with its hiring algorithm was biased against Black and older applicants, people over 40. So the point I'm making here is just because it's AI doesn't necessarily mean it's objective, doesn't necessarily mean it's fair, doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be used for discrimination also. So yeah, that answers that question, right? Because a lot of people will say, okay, well, AI tools, yes, they make mistakes, but aren't they still better than human decision making? Well, that's a false binary, right? Because you're trying to essentially argue that AI decision making is completely separate from human decision making. And that's not the case. Humans are creating the AI decision making. So humans are going to be imbuing the AI decision making with their own prejudices, with their own biases. So it's all one and the same. There's no separation of the two. So to further illustrate this, this is an example that I give in my book. One company actually hired a lawyer to do an audit of their automated hiring system. And in doing the audit, the lawyer asked the engineers to run a program to determine two things, to determine one thing, which is, okay, let's take all the resumes, right, that you have, let's run it through this program, but let's not just ask it to tell us who should we hire. Let's ask it actually a very specific audit question. And that audit question is, of these resumes, what are the two most important factors that as the AI hiring program, what are the two most important factors that you're picking out that you're using to determine who we should hire? The answer, well, first, that the person is named Jared. That's why I call this the story of the Jareds. And then second, that the person played high school lacrosse. So those were the two most important factors that this program was using, right? Unless you actually ask it that audit question, the program doesn't share this, right? So they had to actually do this audit question, and that's how they found those two factors. Person is named Jared. Person is played high school lacrosse. Now you might scratch your head and say, okay, well, high school lacrosse, maybe that's because the program is looking for people who play team sports. Okay, we'll talk about that later. But what about Jared? Why does the name Jared matter for picking somebody for a job, right? Well, you have to think about the fact that AI programs use things called proxy variables. They use variables that actually correlate or can stand in for other things. So for example, the name Jared, when you go to the statistics for the Social Security Administration, you find that the name Jared is predominantly white and is also predominantly male, right? So essentially, this is a white man. Jared is corresponding to someone that's probably being, with a high probability, a white man. So essentially, the program is picking for a white man. That's what it's doing. But what about high school lacrosse? That's okay, right? I mean, it's just a team sport. Okay, but why that specific team sport? Why not basketball? Why not football? Well, what you see actually is that high school lacrosse is not played in all high schools, right? High school lacrosse is in schools that are affluent. And with the history of racial segregation in the United States, affluent schools are going to be in predominantly white neighborhoods. So once again, race actually enters the conversation. So what you're seeing is an algorithm, because of the way it was trained, actually behaving in a very biased way. All right. And this is a problem, right? Because when you're doing hiring, people are looking for the concept of cultural fit. But cultural fit is nebulous, right? It's not like set in stone. But once you put it into an AI system, it can become set in stone because the AI system is inflexible. It just picks out what it thinks you want, and it just goes with that. There's no wiggle room. And that's problematic. And also, you might notice that AI hiring, it becomes a closed loop system. It feeds in. So let's say you only hire white men, right? So that means that only white men get a chance to prove themselves at the job. So they do really well, right? So then you use their resume to now create your next advertisement for the next job, right? Which attracts more white men, right? And then obviously the evaluation, everything, it becomes a loop. It's a closed loop of discrimination. And then finally, we also want to think about the role that AI is playing in reshaping the workplace. Because of the introduction of AI technologies, a lot of CEOs, a lot of even HR people have this appetite for data, right? You hear things like data driven. We're data driven. We want more data. And you have to stop and ask yourself, data driven, what does that mean? Does it mean that we're now seeing workers as horses that essentially need to be driven to work? And essentially that the more data you're collecting on workers, it's really more like a kind of like whip to get workers to work more and more and more. That's what it sounds like. It doesn't sound like a workplace that's actually nurturing human talent. It sounds like a workplace that's trying to extract as much labor as possible from workers. So we do want to be careful the type of ideologies are being created as AI technologies are being incorporated into the workplace. So with regard to that, I have written another article called AI and Captured Capital. This is available online for free. And I think it was also sent to you as part of your continuing education package. Just talking about sort of the labor protections we need from a legal point of view in the workplace to protect workers as more and more AI technologies are being adopted. And also, frankly, the need for transparency in the sort of AI decision making that CEOs are enacting in their workplace. We've heard stories of people being fired by AI. And that's something that's perfectly legal now, but we want to think about, do we want that to be legal? Do we want to create a place where humans are sort of like dismissed like that? What kind of society are we creating by allowing that? And then we want to think about anti-surveillance laws and ethical AI development. Just what are the limits? Because with AI now, you can be surveilled 24/7, even at home. And we want to think about what are the sort of hard limits we want to put in terms of how much your boss should know about you. Should they be able to see your social media, or should that be off limits? And then, like I mentioned, there is this need for audits. Audits are actually crucially important to making sure that AI is actually working the way it's supposed to be and is not harboring all these biases and discrimination. Then there's a role for unions in the workplace. We want to think about how the union can actually give a voice to workers to be able to, for example, have collective bargaining. So we've already seen some evidence of this. Several teacher unions, for example, have actually been able to push back in terms of certain types of AI being forced on them as part of their job. So teachers unions have pushed back on this. So unions are actually one of the ways that workers can have a unified and stronger voice. And then finally, we want to think about recommendations for upskilling and reskilling for workers as part of the AI revolution. So remember what I mentioned before, soft skills are going to remain in demand. Yes, you want digital literacy. You want to essentially learn how AI works, right? So you want to, if there's any sort of like, classes about how to work ChatGPT, classes about Gen AI, yes, take them. Classes about data analysis, take them. But you also want to maintain your skills for communication, your skills for leadership, your skills for teamwork, your problem-solving skills, your flexibility, your ability to negotiate and conflict resolution. Those types of skills are still going to remain in demand. And what you're going to see actually is that you're going to have lifelong learning because AI is going to continue to evolve. So it's not just about, oh, I know how to work ChatGPT, I'm set. Well, something else is going to come out after ChatGPT. So you're still going to have just this lifelong learning that you're just going to have the flexibility to do and the self-motivation to do. And then when it comes to education, we want to think about actually introducing AI and ethics early in K through 12. Right now, a lot of students are learning about AI maybe in high school, maybe in some even only in college. And we really want to think about AI as part of primary education to prime the students to actually understand how these technologies work. But at the same time, we want to make sure we're infusing that education with ethics training. We're thinking about the ethics of how you use AI in different ways and thinking about the impact on society, right? So, for example, one big thing with OpenAI is how OpenAI has decimated copyrights, right, of artists, of creators. And there's a question there, like, should OpenAI have proceeded like that in terms of creating ChatGPT? Could there have been a better model where humans are also compensated and where humans are still appreciated for their work that they have already done? So these are the types of things we want to start talking about with the children, right? The children who in later years are going to be the creators of AI. We also, in terms of education, we want to emphasize project-based problem solving and interdisciplinary learning. So remember how I mentioned I do incorporate AI in my teaching? Well, I do it in a way where my students are still doing projects. So they're actually, in some ways, forced to work more together with humans, right? Now that I've introduced ChatGPT. So the initial thinking, the initial planning, the initial outlining is not with ChatGPT. So they might use ChatGPT for some research, they might use ChatGPT for citation, but they get to think. They get to cultivate their creativity, they get to cultivate their critical thinking before then using ChatGPT as a tool, a productivity tool, not as a thinking tool. And for me, this is actually how you have future-ready education. Yes, you have the knowledge of the tech, etc., but you retain also the humanity training. That's how I think we're going to have a good future of education. And finally, I want to leave us with this quote, from MLK, right? Which is, yes, automation is happening, and it can be used actually to generate wealth for people. It can be used to not keep people in poverty. It can be used to introduce people to ways that they can make money online and they can have access to all these labor markets wherever they are, right? But we need to value humans first, right? We need to value humans more than we value the machine. We need to put the human at the center. So yes, we may also need to think about a universal basic income, right? So Germany has actually already started doing a pilot in this. So has Finland. There are some ongoing smaller studies in the US, not at a national level, more at on a state by state level. And we have to debate, how we want to do this, because yes, some people may eventually be displaced from their jobs, but we of course want to have those people still have an access to a way, a livelihood. And so, a universal basic income might be one way to at least bridge gap the transition period. So that's something we do want to think about as a society. So with that, I want to leave you here with this just overview and address some questions from you all in the audience.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I actually have a question myself.
Yeah.
I was at a meeting a couple months ago with employers, including libraries, but also a lot of tech companies, and they all basically listed what you had on your top 10 soft skills. They listed that as the things they were looking at most
Right.
for employees, but yet people who are looking for jobs are saying they're increasingly facing AI looking not only at their resumes, but also AI interviews. And so it
Right,
seems
right,
like that's
right.
hard to assess. So I didn't know if you had any comments on that.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, that it's going to be a duality of things that workers need to do, right? So yes, you definitely need to maintain those soft skills. Don't ignore them. Don't think they're unimportant. at the same time as you're gaining digital literacy. So, for example, a lot of schools are now training students to know how to do the automated video interviews. So, if you are new to that, take your time and find out information. There is, frankly, a lot of information on the web. I actually talk about them in my book as well, if that is helpful for you to pick up the book and just read through some of the issues that they have and how to counteract those issues. I can just give you one example. So a lot of the automated video interviews, they actually have a hard time registering people who have darker skin. So if that's you keep that in mind and you make sure they have a bright light when you're doing those interviews. Some of those automated video interviews, they have a hard time with accents. If that's you might actually want to contact the people you're interviewing and send them in addition to your interview, sort of a written out response, such that if they have trouble, right, picking up your accent because of the automated video interview, they can have that as a fallback. So there's little tricks that you can do. But yes, you can't ignore the automation that's happening, but you do also need to maintain your soft skills.
Thank you. Jennifer asks, any thoughts on the future of software engineering? My son is currently a student in that major, and I hope to think he wouldn't be unemployed or have to switch professions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, like nobody knows for sure. Like I think there's a lot of like doom projection of like, oh, ChatGPT is gonna be doing all the coding. And ChatGPT is doing some coding, but from what I hear, it's not the sophisticated high-level coding of somebody who has, graduated with a master's or PhD in computer science. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that ChatGPT will not progress, right, to get to that level. It could. But that's why I say it is important then to have something else, right? So let's say you are a computer scientist who also speaks French, right? Now you live in America and you can be conversant, right, with the AI in France, right? Because you actually speak French, right? So, or you're a computer scientist who's also good with children, right? So now you could be really in demand for introducing computer science or AI learning to children in K through 12. Do you see my point? So it's good to have an interdisciplinarity to your training at this point. I think as a good hedge for everyone, really.
Oh, and a related question from Jessica. Libraries were big on promoting coding for the past 10 years, and I've wondered if
Yeah.
that's something we're still going to promote.
I think it's actually I think you should still actually promote it for one reason, right? For the understanding, right? So I think we sometimes see coding as just instrumental, like, oh, I'm gonna learn coding so I can make X. But actually learning coding also allows you to understand some of the results that you're gonna be getting from ChatGPT and what might be wrong with them, right? Or how to fix them. So I do think learning coding is still useful, if only for that, right?
And we had a question that was sent in earlier. Do you have any guidance on how to approach leadership about the concerns with employing AI in the workplace? And you did touch on this a bit. Despite all the concerns about various AI technologies, many workplaces are pushing to add these technologies without considering the drawbacks. So I don't know if you have more to add on that.
I definitely do. So I write extensively about this, both in my book and then also the article that you all received. A lot of CEOs feel like pressure. They're like, oh, that company adopted AI doing X, Y, and Z. We need to do it too. And, a lot of it is like the bandwagon effect that, companies feel like we don't want to be left behind. But frankly, a lot of AI out there is not good. A lot of AI out there is actually not necessarily doing what it claims to do. There's a lot of advertising, there's a lot of hype. So I think the best way to approach leadership in your companies is to say, okay, we want to adopt AI. Can we actually get someone that knows AI to do audits of the ones we want to adopt, right? Can we get someone that knows AI to actually look through and tell us which are the good ones for our specific company? Because that's also another thing. Companies are different. You can't just take an AI that works for another company and think it's going to work for your company. Maybe your company is smaller. Maybe your company is bigger. Maybe your company has different clientele, right? So I think a good way to approach the leadership is just to kind of warn them of the risks, right? Of the drawbacks and provide these cautionary tales to get them to be more sort of thoughtful and get them to be more discerning before they adopt any AI.
Thank you. I'm waiting to see if any more questions come up in the chat or the Q&A. And Jessica, if you have any other questions that you would like to
Sure.
ask, put them in here.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned project-based learning, and in a previous session, they were talking about how educators have to be more engaging now that students can just rely on AI, besides like
Yeah.
project-based learning and getting students to talk to one another. Do you have any other strategies to engage your students?
Yes. So in the classroom, I love to do real life problem solving. So, right. So it's not just giving them a project, it's giving them a project that's actually attached to a real life problem that they somehow can identify with, or that they actually have some sort of personal experience with. And it's also about in the classroom talking through that problem. So that's part of where the interdisciplinarity comes in. So let's say I'm giving them a problem about law, right? I'm going to tell them, okay, we have this legal problem, but what's the history? How did this even come about? So they're gonna also get a history lesson of how this legal problem even came up. And they're gonna be like, oh wow, I didn't even know. And now they're like sucked in, they're interested. And then I'm going to tell them, and this is something that's impacting you today. Do you have thoughts? Do you have feelings? And people generally will have thoughts and feelings about anything that's impacting them personally. And in that way, they're engaged, right? They actually want to use their own brains to think about this problem. So I would say that if, as much as possible, hold off on ChatGPT for the initial stages of whatever projects, right? Of whatever problem solving you're giving them. Have them actually just grapple with that problem on like a human basis, on a peer basis, before allowing them to then go to ChatGPT for like further research or whatever. So these are all the sort of things that I do.
I like that strategy. There's a question in the chat from Megan. How quickly do you think laws addressing AI will be passed?
Not quickly at all, unfortunately. I've been writing about AI since 2016. How many laws on AI do we have? At a federal level, 0, actually. Some states have been a little quicker than others. So California has quite a few laws now that it has introduced, some passed, some not passed. Other states are also like, taking heed, like Colorado, Illinois. But yeah, it's very slow. I mean, I think the nature of laws in general, especially in the United States, is very slow. And unfortunately, AI is moving at such a breakneck speed that is just, I mean, the law is going to look glacial compared to like the progress of AI. And that's just the nature of the way our legal system is set up. And obviously there's an advantage to that because you don't want necessarily people to like make laws willy-nilly, but on the other hand, like we do need some laws. We're like really due for some AI laws. So hopefully we can see more movement soon.
Well, there's a related question in the Q&A. Based on your research, what do you think the workplace could look like in 5 to 10 years if there continues to be little regulation of AI products?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think if there continues to be little regulation of AI products, we're gonna have workplaces that look a lot more like sweatshops, you know? We're gonna have workplaces where there's like total surveillance of workers because you're now gonna be sitting at a desk that has like sensors everywhere. So everything you type will be noticed, everything, even your movement, your body language will be recorded, where you're looking can be recorded, how often you go to the bathroom will be recorded. So we're looking at that type of totalitarian workplace if there's not regulations, unfortunately.
I
But
hate
I
that
hope there
for
will be.
us.
Yeah, I would really hate that for us as well. I
It's
really
like,
would.
What industries are you seeing that in? Because I know at the beginning you said it's a little bit overblown, like the job loss, but at your former
Right.
employer, Cornell, they are starting to shrink the workforce. And from what
Yeah,
we've heard, mainly in IT roles and kind of
yeah,
centralizing that and
yeah.
replacing some of those IT roles with AI.
Yeah, so there's definitely some shrinking. I mean, I don't think it's as much. I say it's overblown in that it's not as rapid as they've saying. Like I still think we have a ways to go, but there's definitely some shrinking already. So we're seeing more quantification already also, even in trying to like quantify things that you would have thought were not really quantifiable. Like, for example, there's now like districts that try to give teachers scores, so like teachers that previously had tenure are now getting scores, and if they get below a certain score, they can be fired. So you see things like that happening now, more quantification. So I think that's more what you're seeing, other than like rather than like outright dismissal, it's more like the job becoming a lot more rigid, the job becoming a lot more super surveilled, a lot more quantified. Um, than necessarily like wholesale, everybody, is dismissed and, we're only using ChatGPT. So when ChatGPT came out, there was actually a wave of companies letting go people. And then guess what? They rehired them all because they found that ChatGPT was not actually as sophisticated to fully take over those jobs. But what you're seeing more now is like maybe instead of hiring two people, they might hire one person and require that person to then use ChatGPT for greater productivity. So that's more what you're seeing.
And have you seen adoption of it at the K through 12 level? Like I've heard of in the news, private schools that are gonna only teach with AI and things like that. I don't know
Yeah,
how.
so unfortunately, I have seen adoption of it actually more at the public school level,
Mm.
because of partnerships with like companies like Google, etc., where like, for example, all the homework, like there was an issue with my kids where I was like, what is this homework? It's like repetitive. And it was basically being assigned by AI. The teachers had not actually checked that it was not the same homework assigned like essentially 10 times. And it was. So yeah, you are starting to see things like that. And unfortunately, I worry that teachers are gonna have actually less and less discretion. And it's just gonna be like, here, you just sent this homework and that's it. You don't even get to look at it. So essentially, AI will assign the homework, AI will also grade the homework. Um, yeah, so that's, I think,
And the students will be using it to do the homework.
exactly, exactly. So it's like not much critical thinking all around. So yeah, so it is I think a concern. So for me, that's why when I advocate for AI training at K through 12, that's not what I'm advocating for. I'm actually advocating for like teach the students, here's what AI can do, here's like what it cannot do, here's the technical ways that it works, here are the ethical issues associated with how it works. That sort of actual true learning is what I'm advocating for.
Mhm. This was a question that was submitted in advance. Have you found effective ways to broach the topic of AI issues with people that are strongly invested? And if so, how did those conversations go?
Yeah, this is
Want
a
to push
good
back?
question. Yeah, no, this is a good question because, yeah, there are some people, that see AI as like, a panacea. Like for those people, AI is gonna just like cure everything. Oh, you have a the teacher shortage. Oh, just use AI. Oh, you have a shortage of, doctors. Just use AI. And I'm like, right? I think one of the things that helps is just to remind those people that AI is not infallible, right? And AI is not quote unquote objective. Just because it's AI doesn't mean it's automatically fair, doesn't mean it's automatically objective, doesn't necessarily mean that it's even more accurate necessarily. It all depends, right, on how that AI was trained. It all depends on the sort of like training data that was used. So, for example, in the medical field, a lot of hospitals, they love AI. They want to introduce AI because they say, there is, uh, a lot of doctor shortages. But what we're finding actually as hospitals are adopting AI is there's the same issues of discrimination happening, right? Because the AI has been trained on the data you have, which is tainted data. So it's not necessarily doing away with the problems you have, right? And sometimes the AI also is not providing that personal touch of asking that follow-up question that a doctor might ask, or just noticing little things that a doctor might notice when they're looking at you in person, right? So my point is AI is a tool, right? And it's just always good to remind the people that any tool can be misused, right? Any tool can be also inappropriate for certain tasks, right? Like some tasks, you need a screwdriver. Some tasks, you need a hammer. If you use a hammer when you need a screwdriver, that doesn't make sense, right? So it's not just, oh, let's adopt AI. You also have to think about what's the appropriate AI for this task that we're trying to do, right?
Are you aware of any labor movements? I know you mentioned the unions, but movements that have started to introduce the conversation about these dangers in the workplace?
Oh, yeah. Actually, a big one is actually the movie industry. It's not like the one you would think necessarily. I mean, there's other ones, of course. So the movie industry, the communication workers. So communication workers are like essentially telemarketers. They have a big union. So they also actually have been at the forefront because if you think a lot of their job is actually managed by AI, right? So AI was using to manage like, oh, how many calls did you pick up? How many calls were satisfactory? And they oftentimes were not able to push back and say, well, actually, that caller was rude or that caller did something, and that's why my numbers are the way they are, right? So part of the union has been to this call might be recorded for quality assurances, right? Because then you can actually check that, right? And notice what's happening. But movie industry, the actors actually push back. So funny thing about the movie industry, when we think about movie actors, we think, oh, Brad Pitt, yeah, Angelina Jolie, the people who are making millions a year, right? That's like not even 1% of actors, right? Most actors are not making anywhere close to that. And most actors actually depend on working regularly to just have health insurance. So when you're part of the work of the actors union, you have to work an X number of days a month to be able to qualify for ongoing health insurance. So what's the issue? The movie studios were trying to use AI to eliminate background actors, right? Which means less work for working actors, right? Because even if you're like starring in some major movie, but that's like your one movie a year and you're making like 20K, maybe 50K from that movie, you still need health insurance. So you need all those background work, right? But now you're not going to have it if they're just going to like use AI to create that. So movie studios actually had to come up with a deal with actors in terms of how much of AI they're going to use for each movie so that they can still have background actors. So that's just one way. So that was a big part of actually the actor strike, the SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA is the union for actors and writers. They joined together and they had a big strike And that was a big part of that, to make sure that there was still going to be enough work for human actors.
I'm not gonna hold my breath for universal basic income.
I know, I know.
Seems like.
I have to put it in there.
Thank you for putting it in there.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Susan, did you have anything else you wanted to?
No, it looks like everything has been addressed. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for
Thanks,
having
Ifeoma.
me. And a lot of my work is available online. You can go through my website, ifeoma@ajunwa.com. And most of my articles are free for download. So yeah, I hope you read more, and feel free to reach out also by email with any questions.
Great, thank you. I feel like we went on an emotional AI
I
journey.
know it's a roller coaster, but I do think there's still hope for humanity, right? It's just make sure you don't lose your people skills no matter what, like first and foremost.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Bye, Ifeoma.
Bye.
Caitlin's gonna
Thank you,
bring
Paula.
us together and wrap up our day.
Yes, we hope that you all enjoyed attending today's symposium even more than we enjoyed putting it together. I want to extend a special thank you to our presenters, Alyssa, Dr. Hare, Betsy, Denise, and Dr. Ajunwa, for their wonderful presentations, and to my colleagues who helped coordinate this event. I would like to recall what Alyssa said this morning. When we librarians leave this work, we raise the bar for everybody and we make it so everyone can do better. I felt this described our goals as library workers so succinctly. Each session we listened to today touched on this work. Each of our presenters today consistently raised the bar with their research so we can all do better as we learn more about AI and the impact of such tools on our own work. And you, our attendees, also raised that bar with your excellent questions and feedback throughout today's conference. If you're interested in discussing tools further, AI tools specifically, my colleague Jen is putting together a virtual group. You're invited to share how you might be putting AI to work in your institutions, or you can sit back and listen if you're just curious. She's putting a link in the chat to a Doodle poll to select a good meeting time in August. So please take the time to fill it out if you want to continue these discussions. Please also remember to fill out your evaluation forms to help inform the next Pillar Symposium. Your feedback is critical to future professional development planning. If you have questions about the CE or CTLE certificates, please contact Jen at her email. Thank you so much for attending today and spending time with us. Now go touch grass and have a great weekend.